Hello, everyone. It's Jeff Rich here from the Burning Archive. Welcome to another live stream. That I'm broadcasting 80 years after the day on which the United States of America dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, and we're remembering that today. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm going to be talking about Hiroshima today. I'm not going to go into too much depth about it, but I certainly want to commemorate this very, very important day in history and I guess ask the question, why, after 80 years, has the United States still not apologized for, perhaps one of the most inhuman acts that have been ever perpetrated? A single military operation, if you count also Nagasaki, that killed approximately 250,000 people. And it is a particularly striking time, I guess, to be discussing the United States attitudes towards nuclear weapons at the moment, because, of course, people all around the world are discussing the question of, are we not necessarily entering World War II, but what is behind this reckless talk of deploying nuclear submarines towards Russia? What is this talk of dead hand, i.e. the sort of the response to a potential American strike on Russia? And what is this talk amongst many Americans around of a potential limited nuclear war, the use of tactical nuclear weapons, or even baiting countries into doing that? It is very scary, I think, and it's part of a history, I guess, or a continuous tradition of American strategists talking about the potential use of nuclear weapons as an instrument of statecraft. So I'm going to talk about that today. The shadow of a second nuclear war. What the hell is the USA thinking? Then the third topic I want to talk about today is the current tension between the United States and India, provoked by both trade and geostrategic tensions. There's, of course, Donald Trump's remark about a dead economy. There's been strong responses to that. It seems to be driven out of a desire to bully India, I guess, to strengthen or give Donald Trump some cards in the negotiation with Russia. And there is even talk about potential sabotage attacks against the oil deliveries to India, which, when you think about it, is a country of 1.4 billion people, not all very wealthy people, and to sabotage their economy by attacking their oil supplies in this way is, again, another monstrous act by the United States, if indeed that is what they are contemplating. And then the fourth topic, I guess, is perhaps stepping back a little bit from the day-to-day news and talking about some great history book recommendations. Last couple of years on the YouTube channel, on the Burning Archive YouTube channel, I have been doing reviews of both the Cundill History Prize. It's a history prize based at McGill University in Canada, and the Wolfson History Prize, which is a history prize based in Britain. It's the longest or wealthiest or richest prize in Britain, the most prestigious prize for history in Britain, the Wolfson History Prize. John Darwin's After Tamerlane, which I do talk about quite a bit on the show, won in whenever John Darwin 1, 2008 maybe, I guess. And also this author by Joy Chatterjee, Shadows at Noon, the South Asian 20th Century, also won the prize. So so it's a great guide, and I'm going to be taking you through live my reaction to the long list of the Cundill History Prize in the second part, in the sort of latter part of the show. So yeah, do feel free to drop comments and say hello, and I will forge on. Of course, many of you will be watching this later on in the evening, it being what is it? It's just gone midday here, Australian time, which I guess is quite late in US time, and far too early for anyone in Europe to be watching The Burning Archive. But I'm sure many of you will pick up the show in later on, and also will watch some of the segments that I'll be releasing shortly. Okay, now let me just give a quick plug for some of my work on the YouTube channel before we dig into the issue of Hiroshima and remembering Hiroshima. So just want to point out to everyone that over at the Burning Archive, at my sort of, homepage on Burning Archive, I've just done a little bit of renovation on the homepage. Hello, ping Violet Quinlaw. Thank you for pinging me. And on the homepage, I've just sort of reorganized some of the playlists and that sort of stuff, just so that it's easier for everyone to check it out. I've got this section here on interviews, which you can also check out. And all my different playlists. So hopefully that will also just make things all a little bit easier for everyone to kind of, make their way around. And also over at my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com, I've done a bit the same. I've also introduced a new feature for paid subscribers, full transcripts of some of my interviews with historians. Oh, Mila Silva, good night from Lima, Peru. I'm so glad you can join us from Peru. That is fantastic. I really must do some shows on South America before too long, but thank you so much for joining me, Mila. Yeah, over at my Substack, I've also introduced this new feature of having some of the transcripts for my interviews with various historians. You can see there my interview with Sheila Fitzpatrick, the very distinguished historian of the Soviet Union and Russia, who actually also appeared recently on Peter Lavelle and George Samuel Ellie's The Gaggle. Very much worth watching. So yeah, do head over to jeffrich.substack.com. Become a paid subscriber if you can, because that will certainly support my work. But you can also join for free and get my weekly email with, insights and history book recommendations. And there'll be a whole lot of history book recommendations later on in the show. And I can see Violet Quinlaw saying the one on American nihilism is gold, worth watching, even if you understand subject. Okay. Thanks so much, Violet. That's fantastic. I'm actually thinking of putting together some of my writings from the last couple of years, including sort of an adapted version of the American nihilism piece into a book in the next few weeks. So look out for that as well. I'll certainly include some reference to that on the channel. So thanks, Violet. I really appreciate that feedback, that praise and that compliment. It's really nice of you. Okay, let's talk then about Hiroshima. Now, of course, on this day, 80 years ago, the United States dropped a bomb on Hiroshima, an atomic bomb on Hiroshima, And it, is a very controversial issue. There is a lot of historiography or history written about it, and a lot of arguments about it too, in particular whether this decision was really justified. Was it really necessary to drop an atomic bomb to kill 250,000 people in order for Japan to concede defeat in the Second World War? Of course, August 1945 was a couple of months after Germany had surrendered in Europe. And there had been, a process over a couple of months at least to sort of negotiate a surrender from Japan. And there were significant discussions within the sort of Japanese decision-making structures all the way up to the emperor in making that decision. And I did a video which I think came out yesterday. Yes, it came out yesterday. On this, I guess, the decision-making process or the lead up to this event. And that video really focused on, I included in that video a sort of a reading from the key section of this book by Richard Overy, Blood and Ruins, which also is absolutely a highly recommended book on the Second World War, which I think, as I've said before on the channel, he describes as the Great Imperial War, 1931-1945. But really, I guess when you think about it in that way, 1931 being the date when Japan entered Manchuria in the sort of conflict with China, which of course China itself was, fairly internally divided state at that point. But it rebalances your concept about the war, rebalances your concept of, how much the war was in Asia or Africa or Europe or the Pacific. And it also rebalances your sense of who bore the cost of the war. I guess it's pretty well known, even though not as well known as it should be, that 27 million Soviet Union citizens died from the war. Not all from European Russia, also from all parts of Russia or the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union was even bigger than the current Russian Federation is today, including Armenia, Azerbaijan, etc. And it totally rebalances your sense of the wars in the sequence of 20th century history as well. So it's a really great book to watch. And I did read, I just see Violet Cundill saying, yep, even from before they dropped it, it was a debate. Surprise, surprise. The guys tasked with doing it were less keen on idea than some generals in the Army and Navy. Yes, fantastic. And I actually quote a co-pilot from who was on Enola Gay and dropped the bomb, who says he will, in 100 years' time he will never forget what he saw. But unfortunately, that wasn't always the case in the United States. So in terms of the decision-making process around the war, I guess I would refer people to check out that video, and I'll include a link in the video description when this video is sort of the replay. But I kind of what I really wanted to do today in terms of commemorating Hiroshima is just read from this book, which I was just able to get from the public library, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the real story of the atomic bombings and their aftermath. And there's two relatively short sections I just want to read, just to really honour the memory of these tragic events, because they were tragic events. As Violet says, there was a significant debate. The conclusion I really draw from Richard Overy's discussion of the issue is the dropping of the atomic bombs was not the decisive factor in making Japan surrender, and hence was an unnecessary act, an unnecessary decision, an unnecessary murder of 250,000 citizens at the end of the war. And yet American decision makers, elites across the political spectrum, have yet to come to terms with that era, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And there was certainly one factor which, comes out to some degree in Richard Overy's discussion, although he focuses in that part of his book more on the narrative of the events. But later on in Blood and Ruins, he does talk about the broad issue of atrocities and war crimes, which of course came in many forms during the Great Imperial War from 1931 to 1945, and particularly racially motivated war crimes, of course, the Holocaust, but also to some degree the Germans' attitude towards the Slavs and the Soviet Union, and of course attitudes to both from Japan to Chinese, and also from the allies of Japan towards both, the allies of China, of Chiang Kai-shek towards him and his fellow Chinese people, and also towards Japan as well. And it's on that, I just want to briefly refer to some of that in terms of the context for the decision to drop the bomb in this book here from Paul Ham, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. So just forgive me while I just read this to you. It's just one paragraph, really, or two paragraphs here, saying that Western governments were ready to exploit and popularize the hatred of the Japanese. The Germans were a bit like us, if deceived by an evil doctrine. But, quote, there was no such thing as a good Japanese. Japanese were all evil beyond redemption, was a typical view. Washington legislated to intern Japanese Americans, though not German or Italian ones, giving official imprimatur to the designation of the Japanese as a racial enemy. Nor did Allied leaders attempt to distinguish the Japanese armed forces from the Japanese people, and easily conflated the loathing of the military regime with a general contempt for the race. Easily conflated the loathing of the military regime with a general contempt for the race. And I do wonder, aren't we seeing this today as well? In different contexts and in relationship to different peoples. Roosevelt himself, FDR, Roosevelt himself, was not above making crude, racist jokes about the Japanese, and commissioned a study of the scientific evidence of the inferiority of the Asiatic races and the effects of racial crossing. Remembering this is, this is America in the 1940s, where, there's still significant internal racial discrimination within America against, Black Americans, against Latino Americans, against Native Americans, and indeed against Chinese, Japanese immigrants. Indeed, even against certain disfavoured European immigrants. Italians were almost treated as a lower class race in the sort of 1920s by some of the sort of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant Americans. So if I continue, FDR commissioned a study on the scientific evidence of the inferiority of the Asiatic races, in which the Smithsonian Institute, the prestigious museum in America, Smithsonian Institute, Smithsonian professor Rilika remarked that the Japanese were utterly egotistic, tricky, and ruthless. Don't we hear some similar rhetoric about other opponents of the United States today? Winston Churchill, a grand old white supremacist, and that is what he was, of course, in 1942, 1943, jailed Gandhi and the others who sought to free India, and resisted any attempts to sort of protect the people affected by the dreadful, dreadful Bengali famine, arguably as much a case of genocide as the Holodomor or other similar events. Churchill, a grand old white supremacist, wanted those yellow dwarf slaves, again, not my words, Winston Churchill's words, dead in great numbers as soon as possible. Of course, Japan had stripped Britain of its Asian empire. He was as resentful as perhaps Donald Trump is today about the strategic abyss of the British Empire. He never forgave them for humiliating Britain at Singapore. There you go. Now, this is interesting too in the context of Australian foreign policy and the narrative of Australian foreign policy, often narrated by sort of Labor or progressive politicians in Australia, recently discussed in Anthony Albanese's speech about independence and progressive patriotism, which I did a video on the channel. The author, Paul Ham, notes that Australia's Labor government, that is John Curtin, Ben Chifley, outdid them all, introducing a formal policy of racial hatred as an instrument of war, which broadcast advertisements that ended, "We always did despise them anyhow." Dear me, Australia really does have a bad track record of succumbing to hatred of the other at times of war on behalf of the empire. It's doing it again today. He continues, a lone voice, thank God for this, a lone voice opposed the use of hatred as war policy. Robert Menzies, Australia's Conservative opposition leader, in one of his most dignified speeches, attacked this hysterical demonisation of a whole people. The story that you often hear from people like Anthony Albanese and, many people on the Labor side of politics is that, it's Labor that has driven Australia's engagement with Asia. But it's not entirely correct. But that's perhaps a story for another day. And I can see also a couple of other comments, which I might just come back to as well. What I wanted to do is just read this approximate page or so, which actually just from Paul Ham's book, which actually describes the bombing of Hiroshima. And I'm doing this really, I guess, as a commemoration, as an act of memory of this extraordinary event on this very important day, 80 years after Hiroshima, remembering Hiroshima in the shadow of potentially America's second nuclear war. So let me read this. It is quite harrowing. And then I'll move on to the next point in the discussion, which is about, the ideas in America about perhaps fighting a second nuclear war. At 8:15 a.m., he sets the scene by saying, it's a weekday, it's a warm day, or even a hot day in August in Japan. Summer in Japan, late summer, I guess, in Japan. And school children are getting ready for school. People are going to work. The previous night there had been a few air raids. Air raids were common, of course. America had also firebombed Tokyo. And yet, people had almost got blasé. There'd been a small alert earlier in the day, but people were starting to ignore these alerts. Of course, no one could know or expect what was about to happen to them. At 8:15 a.m., another B-29 flew high over Hiroshima, its silver underbelly flashing in the morning sun. Some looked at it incuriously, most got on with their work. No air raid sounded. There were no warnings, none of the standard flyers which the US Air Force usually dropped to warn a targeted city of its imminent destruction and the people to evacuate. Of course, they intended to destroy them all. Quote, in brackets, the Potsdam Declaration did not specify which cities would experience prompt and utter destruction. That was the warning, which I think Richard Overy discussed in the video that I did the other day. Some Hiroshimans believed they saw Little Boy, which was the ridiculous name that the United States gave for the bomb, falling from the Enola Gay. Others saw the testing instruments dropped by parachute from the great artiste. Truly astonishing, such contributions from American popular culture. At 1,900 feet, 580 metres above the heart of the city, the bomb's detonation sequence ended. The gun mechanism fired the bullet that slammed the two halves of the uranium core together, creating critical mass. The fast chain reaction emitted a soundless flash like a huge magnesium flare that produced for a millionth of a second conditions comparable to the surface of the sun. The temperature inside the bell-shaped fireball reached 1 million degrees Celsius. Neutron and gamma rays, the most penetrable forms, saturated the city centre. The weapon exploded directly above Shima Hospital in the centre of Hiroshima, instantly killing all patients, doctors and nurses. The heat wave charred every living thing within a 500-metre radius and scorched uncovered skin at 2 kilometres. Those who saw the flash within this circle did not live to experience their blindness. The ground temperature ranged briefly from 3,000 to 4,000 degrees Celsius. Iron melts at 1,535 degrees Celsius. Water in tanks and ponds boiled. Leaves in distant parks turned crinkly brown, then to ash. Tree trunks exploded. Tiles melted within 1,100 metres. Kilns achieved that effect at 1,650 degrees Celsius. Shock and blast waves rippled over the city, punched the innards out of buildings and homes and bore the detritus on the nuclear wind. Brick buildings 2 stories and higher were completely destroyed within a 1.6 kilometre radius, and concrete buildings severely damaged. All wooden structures collapsed within 2.3 kilometres of the detonation point. Within the immediate vicinity, the blast pressure was 32 tonnes per square metre, and the wind speed 440 kilometres per second. 3 kilometres away, though, these fell to 1.2 tonnes and 30 metres per second. Tens of thousands of people within a 2-kilometre radius were burned, decapitated, disemboweled, crushed and irradiated. The sudden drop in air pressure blew their eyes from the sockets and ruptured their eardrums. The shockwave cleaved their bodies apart. They were the lucky ones. Of course, he's there referring to the people who survived and suffered horrific injuries and slow, painful subsequent deaths from radiation and burns and all sorts of other injuries, as indeed the young child shown on the thumbnail of this live stream of this video. And Violet's is actually like 10 times the temperature of Sun's surface for a split second. It is truly astonishing. So it's a very solemn moment, and one I just find truly appalling that the United States, after all these years, has not had the humanity, the decency, the historical consciousness, the morality to formally and officially apologise. Indeed, Jean says what the Americans did will be remembered as long as mankind exists. Indeed. And Violet Cundill says what humans do to other humans. Indeed. It's with deep sadness that we say that. Just on this failure to recognise this has been debated quite a lot, and why one wonders it has happened. Indeed, as I understand it, the very first American president even to visit Hiroshima was Barack Obama in the last months of his presidency in 2016. The Nobel Prize winner who won the Nobel Prize for showing up, it would seem, appearing in the arena, took 8 years to get around to visiting the scene of perhaps America's most warlike and disgusting act, and really at the point where it would not cost him anything more politically. And even then, he carefully avoided apology language. Even Joe Biden constantly failed to do that. And of course, we don't see any sign whatsoever that Donald Trump would even contemplate such a thing. He probably thinks America did the right thing. Indeed, people like Lindsey Graham have said, because it was right for us to do this in America, it should be right for Israel to drop nuclear bombs on its both domestic and foreign enemies. One really does worry, shake one's head at the moral character of the American political elite. I apologise if that's troubling for any American viewers there. I'm sure many citizens of America feel the same way, but I really do think it's time America apologised for this act. But rather than apologise, what is America doing? Here we move into the second part of the discussion today. What is America doing in relationship to making threats of a second nuclear war? Indeed, Hiroshima was not the only time that the United States contemplated the use of these horrific weapons. During the Korean War, 1950 to 1951, in which the appalling the appalling killing conducted by America, as if it was not enough. Huge mass graves. KJ No has spoken very eloquently about this on my program sort of late last year. As if that wasn't enough, General MacArthur, the Generalissimo in charge of Japan, during World War II, the Generalissimo in charge of Australia, headquartered in Australia, he had a plan to drop multiple atomic bombs on China. Again, in the first Taiwan Strait crisis, the argument over who controls that small island, or relatively large island, not as big as Australia, island off China in 1954 to 1955, there were further contemplations by an Admiral Radford of such use of nuclear weapons. Again, in the Vietnam War, General Curtis LeMay coined the phrase that so many American extremists, because I think one can only call them that, and we'd hear this phrase often during the various wars in West Asia, the Iraq, Afghanistan wars, so on, etc. General Curtis LeMay said, "Let's bomb them back to the Stone Age." It's good that Curtis LeMay made sure he was informed about the consequences of such a thing for the planet. CJNG said 300,000 lives lost in Nanjing. Yes. Harbin unit. That's interesting. Yeah, I checked. I think my reference to the largest single military operation was taken from Richard Overy, and you may well be right there on Nanjing Jianging, and I will check those facts as well. And then, of course, Cuban Missile Crisis, there was talk from General LeMay again about a preventive nuclear strike. And again, such, rash talk by at least some advisors during the Nixon years as well. And I guess, Ronald Reagan's peace through strength, eerie rhetoric again today was certainly about changing the nuclear balance between the United States and the Soviet Union. But what's most scary of all is, so there were all these previous things, but there has also been a continued pattern of advocating the belief contrary to the view that Ronald Reagan ultimately found after engaging with Mikhail Gorbachev, that a nuclear war can never be won and never fought. There was there's been continued talk about the United States being able to play a game of survivor with nuclear war, to outwit, outplay, and outlast its opponents, to be the first to drop the bomb, destroy, those inferior people way over there, and survive the outcome. In the Bush administration, a nuclear posture review in 2002 considered preemptive nuclear use, including, the familiar opponents of American power: Iran, Iraq, North Korea, Libya, Syria, China, Russia. We seem to be carrying on with that. Obama talked a big talk, but strengthened the nuclear modernization program, continued to try to be dominant in strategic balance. And of course, again, our peacemaker president, so-called Donald Trump, in 2018, similarly lowered the threshold for nuclear use in the Nuclear Posture Review. And in his current administration, he's now deploying subs to somewhere, making threatening noises about nuclear war with Russia. And it is particularly scary that his Deputy Defence Secretary, Elbridge Colby, the son or grandson, I can never quite remember which, or nephew of another Colby who was in charge of the CIA, indeed in charge of the CIA in the early 1970s when some dodgy things were going on between the CIA and Australia. Elbridge Colby himself, who is an absolute China hawk, authored a book in 2021 called The Strategy of Denial, where he talked specifically about tactical nuclear weapons for the Taiwan conflict and the feasibility of a limited nuclear war. And he has published articles in the prestigious, so-called prestigious Foreign Affairs magazine, and given congressional testimony along those lines. And there are a range of other people who have such views. And what I also wanted to point out to everyone, and I may well do a separate program specifically on this because the actual detail of it is all a little bit, is quite detailed, and the writing is not the clearest, if I can just say that as a former, writing specialist in government, is this paper, which I have here, and, I'd love to hear if anyone shares this with Brian Belletic. I'd love to hear Brian Belletic or even KJ No's discussion of this paper by the Hudson Institute, which is one of those influential think tanks that's, shelters and sponsors these advocates of America's second nuclear war. The Hudson Institute, which has a paper by Andrew Krepenevich Jr. In the fine American tradition, Beyond the Nuclear Balance, a Strategic Forces Net Assessment. And I won't go into too much detail about this paper, but a number of things about it really did kind of scare me just a little bit. And that was, in essence, this paper argues that the United States is presented with a new strategic situation in which it doesn't just have one nuclear opponent, it has two near-peer nuclear opponents. I mean, there's a big disparity, but Russia and China. And there is a genuine sense of, I'd say, almost fear, panic in this paper from the Hudson Institute, that balance has tipped against the United States and may get worse very, very quickly. That it's the nuclear deterrent will not be sufficient to sort of coerce Russia and China into actions that the United States may want, and they specifically mention Taiwan, or that it's getting close to the point where any advantage that the United States had will sort of disappear, and hence they need to devise perhaps act quickly and perhaps act together against both Russia and China in order to get their desired effect of strategic dominance. Quite a scary paper. I think I may well do another video on it, although I've got a few things racked up in the sort of schedule at this point. And nuclear weapons is not my greatest thing, but I may well see. I do recommend. I would be really interested in hearing views of some other, perhaps people in the broad, YouTube world politics commentary space who might want to comment on this and the extent to which this is playing into the current game. Well, to call it a game, I think, is the wrong thing. The current tactics of negotiation in the conflicts between Russia, China, India, Pakistan, all of whom, and Israel, all of whom are nuclear states. There are conflicts going on at the moment between all of those. The United States is taking a pretty coercive and brutal attitude. It's not getting its way anywhere, and it is a terrible thing. Yeah, Violet, they did calling it the great game for a time, and it really is. It's funny, some of these verbal habits, they're sort of minor, but I think they just help inoculate people against the actual reality of what this experience of war really is. There is this whole mystery that, part of the mystery of, why things haven't quite turned out to plan with, the United States plan with provoking the war with Russia, etc., is that maybe there was just this overestimation of capabilities and underestimation and kind of sort of living in a bubble of their own ideas rather than actually, thinking of it as a game, thinking of it as a virtual reality experience rather than an actual war where real things happen, real and unpredictable things happen. Great point by Violet Quinlaw. Collateral damage, exactly. All this sort of insulating language, I guess, is really quite scary. So, big concern, and people may well have seen me over on Pascal Lataz's channel, and here's Pascal's channel here, Neutrality Studies. If you haven't already subscribed to Pascal's channel, Neutrality Studies, you can join 231,000 subscribers at Pascal's channel. It's so good because Pascal's channel is such a what would you say? Such a high quality. I think it's one of the, if not the best geopolitics commentary channel out there on YouTube. Really, really high quality guests. Great range and breadth and depth of guests to really deep expertise that's shared there from, many disciplines and countries around the world. Obviously he's not so keen on inviting warmongers on his show, so I guess you don't get every perspective represented. But I did appear on the show there. You can just see me there, and that little one there, which I've just activated there, the collective West is collapsing. And the reason I just wanted to mention that was to say that like the interview with Pascal was not scripted or anything, and it just was kind of a conversation that came up, and it just came up somehow in the conversation that we're in this strange situation where over the last few months we've seen multiple attacks on the nuclear capabilities of other states, the Operation Spiderweb event, the Operation Sindoor, where India took out aspects of the nuclear capability of Pakistan, the United States strike on Iran, and I think there was one other event as well, which I've kind of forgotten just for now. But all of these are kind of, oh, I think I was also referring to the way in which the Oreshnik missile strike from late last year similarly is a kind of a rebalancing of the sort of non-nuclear strike against rebalancing. And in fact, this Hudson Institute Hudson Institute paper actually explicitly refers to some of this sort of not symmetric, I guess. It's not matching nuclear against nuclear, so there's not just one way to go on a path to nuclear war. Somehow you can knock out the nuclear capable or the counter-strike capabilities of your opponents and therefore win a limited nuclear war. And I do feel it's very dangerous and very unstable and very disconcerting that this does seem to be an espoused strategy, at least in parts of the United States. And I can see Ed Bagdonis saying greatly, let me share this on screen. Ed, greatly admire the work you do in creating an awareness of the threats in the world today and the nefarious actions of some trying to generate fear and instability. Neutrality studies is also good. Thank you so much, Ed. I guess that's why I do it. Not a great money earner, but I do feel, I feel the world's in a very dangerous place right now, and I have at least some insight from both my experiences in government and also experience in history, which I hopefully help people sort of see some of these issues a little bit more clearly, and maybe shows a bit of a path towards dialogue as well. So fantastic, and I'm still sort of learning the whole streaming trick here, so I may come back to some other comments as well, but I really appreciate that comment from you, Ed. Thanks so much for making it. All right, now that's what I really wanted to say about our second point, the shadow of nuclear war. What the hell is the USA thinking? I really do feel we're in the shadow of a potential nuclear war. It's very dangerous. It may not develop in the way that everyone always thinks of, big strikes against other people. It may well be that things like these cyber attacks or drone attacks or other sorts of attacks against nuclear capabilities are perceived as a threat that is an existential threat that is preparing for a first strike nuclear attack, etc. And we might be, before we know it, in a situation which is absolutely dreadful. I know there was a guest I once heard on Hrove Moric's Geopolitics and Empire podcast who talks about the effects of nuclear war, and the fact is that the immediate impacts that I described there of Hiroshima are just one of the dreadful let me just interrupt. Thank you, Violet. Don't worry if you're making good money on YouTube. You're probably part of the problem, not part of the solution. Yeah, absolutely. And look, there are plenty of people on YouTube who, I guess, find a market, I guess, and serve that market. I guess my whole life in government and in history is, I guess, to try to tell the truth, I guess, to try to see things that, it's not just the predictable usual analysis and offer my, the more subtle assessment of what's going on. And, that doesn't, help with ratings, I guess, but it certainly helps with a sense of integrity. So thanks so much, Violet, for the encouragement. And YouTube does have the greatest reach, absolutely. Al-Qaeda. Now, I've sort of lost track of what I was saying there. Yeah, so I do feel we're really in the shadow of a nuclear war, second nuclear war, led by the United States. It's a very troubling times, but let's see, maybe it just will all fizzle out, or maybe there are some genuinely sensible decision makers. Maybe inertia and fear for themselves will ultimately take over, but it is a very scary situation. Let me then now talk about the third topic for today, which is how USA and India are falling out. And whether Donald Trump's bully tactics have backfired. Well, I'd say they're probably backfiring all around the world, but there is a particular issue that's going on in India. Of course, the other day, Donald Trump referred to India as a dead economy. He's imposed some tariffs. I'm not entirely across the detail of what he's announced, but it's very much tied up with a sense of exasperation that Russia's not doing what he wants them to do in those negotiations. So he's gone after India as a kind of a weak link. And and this has really created quite a furore in India. I have been tuning into the India media quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, and it really has caused quite a big reaction, and scratched memories of British colonialism. Really. And also some of the terms that Narendra Modi has used to talk about, economic resilience against these actions by America have also evoked those memories. He talks about Swadeshi, which is kind of economic self-reliance, but is also part of the movement associated with Gandhi, but much broader than just Gandhi, Rabindranath Tagore and others in the early 20th century, where a whole range of, consumption choices, lifestyle choices, personal conduct choices were being made by people to sort of separate out from the British Empire within the realms of their lives. So I think some of these actions by the United States have really quite significantly harmed the relationship with the USA. And I've noticed the American former official commentator, sort of expert on, Asian affairs, or American expert on Asian affairs, Evan Feigenbaum has made similar comments. And I will probably return to this topic in a little bit more detail in other streams and other shows in the weeks to come. But I did want to touch on it a little bit today. However, I did also yesterday, in fact, interview the American political sociologist Salvatore Babones, who's based in Australia, has been based in Australia now. I think I'm not sure exactly, maybe 15 years he's been in Australia. I think he's perhaps not going back. And he has become quite an expert commentator on India over the last 5 years. And he's just released a book called Dharma Democracy. And I interviewed him the other day for the program, and that video will be coming out on Friday, I think. So do check that out. And I specifically asked him about this issue of India-US relationships. He is not so troubled about it, but do have a listen to what he has to say. I really think it's quite interesting. He's very much of the view that America's, got this. America will, retain its hegemony and all that sort of thing. As regular viewers to my show would know, absolutely don't have that view, but it is very much one of the things that he does sort of talk about. And So do check that out. He's got a fairly confident view. And, leave me a comment in that video when you see it. Let me know what you think. I think things are developing a little bit faster or in a slightly different direction, perhaps even than Salvatore anticipated, but we shall see. We shall see. And while we're on India, this is a good moment maybe just to mention that on my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com, you can join me as part of my world history tour. There, and I'll just scroll down. There we go. The India is the focus of my world history world tour at the moment. I'm going through over 8 weeks looking at some key aspects of Indian history to help you understand, the changing role of India in the world and to understand its history and its society and culture much better. This week I did a piece on nation, migration, identity, and diaspora, which is about the whole issue of migration. You can see there, that's a picture of some Indian South Asian migrants in one of the Gulf states in quite difficult conditions. And do check out that piece because it's interesting, particularly for Australian viewers, because one of the issues that comes through is that there's been a relationship in terms of Indian migration to Australia for a very long time, all the way back at least to the 1830s. In the 1830s was when Britain abolished, the slavery, the transatlantic slave trade, etc., at least within its empire. However, Britain was colonizing, exploiting India at this point, and South Asian sort of migrant labour grew to be a significant resource that substituted for some of the black slave labour on the British Empire's plantations, including in particular sugar plantations around the world, including later in the 19th century, very much in Australia, the sugar plantations of Australia. So the whole issue of what was called coolie labour became very important and quite a vexed issue in relationship as much as Chinese labour was to the White Australia policy. And I talk about all those sorts of things in the Substack piece. So do go over to jeffrich.substack.com, and as well as the videos here, I think it's great to also read some of my stuff, and I often bring out some of those essays as sort of video essays on the YouTube channel, but sometimes it's best just to read these things as well. All right, now Violet Quinlaw mentions blackbirding from the nearby islands for our cane production. Absolutely, yep. Absolutely true, very much true. It's quite a vexed thing. And, there's some really interesting aspects of the, what's exploitative and what's not about some of our relationship with India today. As again, regular viewers would know, I really think Australia should, follow India's path of multi-alignment, but we also perhaps need to face up to, some of the darker side of things in Australian history, and what our relationship with the big empire, whether it was first Britain or whether it was first America, has sort of drawn us into. Okay, now what I want to share with you now is, some book recommendations. And I did want to first, before I get into the Cundill History Prize, show you this particular book recommendation. Let me go. Hopefully you can see that a little bit better. Susan Southard, Nagasaki, Life After Nuclear War, which looks at the issue that started out the program, of course, around Hiroshima and stuff. And Nagasaki, of course, was the second victim on the 9th of August, Saturday. And we should remember that event too. Again, even perhaps less necessary, if such a thing can be said, than the first action really done at the point at which Japan really actually was about to surrender. So truly horrible, horrible actions. But the main book recommendation focus I want to share with you is this thing here, the Cundill History Prize long list. And the Cundill History Prize is based in Canada, and it is also, I'll just bring one other thing up for you. There we go. You can see it a little bit more clearly here. So it's a prize that is based in Canada, and it awards quality book. It has really quite a good transnational focus. I mean, it tends to kind of award its prize to the sort of North American Academy largely, and it has a bit of an English bias, not totally so, but and if there are any viewers there who know some of the better history prizes outside of the Anglophone world, do let me know in the comments. But every year they issue this long list, and I think there are 15 books in this long list, and they are what I'm going to sort of preview for you all today. And I'm literally going to do this sort of live for you. And what I'll just do, if you just bear with me 1 second, I'll just bring up their little, this one here, while I just do a little bit of turning away from the camera work and increasing my ability and your ability to actually read these things. And there we are. Okay, so let me then add this one to stage. Bang. Add to stage. Remove. Add. Bang. Okay, so we're going to go through this list, and I'm just going to give you, let you know what they are, because I mean, one of the things I really like to do, in terms of just getting new, fresh perspectives on history and world affairs, is to just check out some of the top books and history prize lists to get some ideas for some of the fresh current approaches to studying these issues, and not just sort of go back to the same old things that might have been recommended to you at high school or 20 years ago or 50 years ago, but to read some of the current history, because history has gone through a lot of transformations over the last 50 years. There's a much greater focus on global transnational history, a much greater focus on how a freeing up of some of the theoretical approaches, and all sorts of changes in perspective. And what's more, it's perhaps surprisingly, every now and then new kinds of evidence come into play. New documents appear, new ways of using different types of historical evidence come into play. For example, Peter Frankopan's book about the history of the planet really, plumbs all the sort of scientific and other evidence over the historical transformations in the environment over the last however many years it has been. So I find this is just a great way to sort of come up with some different approaches to things and think about different issues. So so I'm just going to rattle through these and offer my comments and let you know about each of them so that perhaps you can also check out some of these books. Okay, so let's add we go there. Okay, so the first book on the list is by Manan Ahmed Asif, Disrupted City, Walking the Pathways of Memory and History in Lahore. This sounds fascinating. Urban history is a really, really interesting thing. Let me just share this tab with you. This is the actual book there, Disrupted City, Walking the Pathways of Memory and History in Lahore in Pakistan. And this provides a stunning history of Pakistan's cultural and intellectual capital from one of the preeminent scholars of South Asia. So again, it's a fascinating way to sort of get a different perspective on. We don't hear a lot about Pakistan in the Western media. What one does hear about it is usually in the conflicts, context of war and changes and security services and the conflicts with India, that sort of thing. And so this gives us a sense of what the actual the cultural history of Lahore is, and that will be fascinating. So I reckon that sounds like a good one, so do check that one out. The second book is by Emily Kalachi, Wages for Housework, The Story of a Movement, an Idea, a Promise. Now this is interesting, I think, as well. Let me share the actual book there. You can see that there, Wages for Housework, Emily Kalachi. And this is the story about, across the globe in the 1970s, a network of feminists distilled their struggles into a single demand, wages for housework. Today, it remains a provocative idea and an unfulfilled promise. I remember this being like, when I was growing up in the 1970s, being, quite a strong, important history. It says here, Emily Kalachi is professor of history at the University of Wisconsin and Madison. And again, how we organize our working lives, both our I guess our public and our private working lives, is one of the fundamental drivers of history. So this sounds a really fascinating topic as well. So I would recommend that to viewers. The third top book on the list is by Cornell Chang, A Fractured Liberation, Korea Under US Occupation. Now, I have talked about this issue with KJ No on the program, and there you can see the book by Cornell Chang, A Fractured Liberation, Korea Under US Occupation. The story of, the Korean War and the US occupation, both after 1945 and after the Korean War, which, of course, divided North Korea and South Korea, is, undertold and very important and very tragic. There's also a great book by Michael Pembroke about all of this that describes the Korean War. It's the start of the American century, and it really ought to be better known, this history. And it played out in the whole question of the international adoption scandal, which I actually discussed with KJ No on the program not so long ago. So this is very much worth checking out, this book. I think I may well check this one out. I do notice here we go. A poignant return to Korea's forgotten Asian spring. A moment ripe with possibility denied by the post-war US military occupation. When Japanese imperial rule ended in August 1945, the Korean peninsula erupted with hopes that had been bottled up for 40 years. It had been occupied by Japan. It had previously, for a very, very, very long time, been an independent country. Electrifying excitement jolted Koreans into action everywhere. Peasants occupied farmlands, workers seized control of factories, and women demanded political and economic equality. And of course, dare I say it, capitalist America was not so keen on that. Of course, it was fighting the Soviet Union. It was engaging in a brutal ideological struggle, which was in part, conflict between economic systems, socialist versus capitalist, and also ideologies of freedom versus, I guess, the ideological values of socialism in its, ideal state of, the proletariat, the workers' rights, and all that sort of thing. So this sounds like a really, really fascinating story. So do check this one out. I think I will be checking this one out as well. Let's go to the next book, which is by Santilla Chingapi, Black Convicts: How Slavery Shaped Australia. And I can tell you, I was quite intrigued by that title. So I checked this one out a little bit earlier before. Let me just see if I can make you can see it there, I hope. Black Convicts: How Slavery Shaped Australia. Now, this story, if I just read from the promo here, is the story of Australia's black convicts has been all but erased from our history. In recovering their lives, Santilla Chingapi offers a fresh understanding of this A Fatal Shore. That's a famous book about the convicts in Australia, The Fatal Shore, by Robert Hughes, who was an art critic. It was a controversial book showing how empire, slavery, race and memory have shaped our nation. And it really describes the stories of African descent convicts who came to Australia. At least 15 on the first fleet, when the first, British settlement in Australia, and it again got to 500. And so this is a fascinating story. Again, it's this sort of transnational story of, we don't just put people have moved around the world for centuries and centuries and centuries. We don't all live in these little national boxes. There's an African side to Australia's story that Santilla Chingapi brings out. And Santilla Chingapi is a filmmaker, historian, and author whose work explores settler colonialism, slavery, and post-colonial migration in Australia. And you know what? I might even see if she might come on the show to have a chat about this book, which sounds absolutely fascinating. All right, let's go to our next book by Marlene L. Doubt, The First and Last King of Haiti, The Rise and Fall of Henry Christophe. There we are. The First and Last King of Haiti, The Rise and Fall of Henry Christophe. You can see a little picture of him there. And what have we got here? The essential biography of the controversial rebel traitor and only king of Haiti. Henry Christophe is one of the most richly complex figures in the history of the Americas and was, in his time, popular and famous the world over. Brilliant. So he was born in 1767 to an enslaved mother. Yes. It's there's a whole story of rebellion in the various sort of slave economy sort of islands of the Caribbean and so forth, and off the African and American coasts. Uh, that is truly fascinating. So I didn't know this story at all. This sounds like a ripper. So do check that one out if you're interested in that one as well. Of course, also go to your public library, of course, because, if one buys every book on this list, I don't want anyone to impoverish themselves by doing this sort of thing. Okay, next book on the list is by Jonathan Guinap, Against Constitutional Originalism, a Historical Critique. And I think this is very much a book for the sort of this constitutional originalism is a very big thing in the United States political scene. This sounds like it's very much one for the lawyers. I think it's probably a bit it will go over my head, but if you're really interested in the whole American constitutional issues, do check this one out. Then we go to Greg Grandin, America, A New History of the New World, with the accent there emphasizing, like Felipe Fernandez Amesto, a former guest on the show, has mentioned, the Hispanic aspect of America. And I think I might well get this one out. It says Greg Grandin is a winner of the Pulitzer Prize. He is the Van Woodward Professor of History at Yale University. And let me read a little profile of this book here. The story of the United States' unique sense of itself was forged facing south, no less than South Latin America's was indelibly stamped by the looming colossus to the north. In this stunningly original reinterpretation of the New World, Professor Greg Grandin reveals how the Americas emerged from the constant turbulent engagement with each other, shedding new light on well-known historical figures like Bartolomé de las Casas, Simón Bolívar and Woodrow Wilson, as well as lesser-known actors such as the Venezuelan Francisco de Miranda, who almost lost his head in the French Revolution and conspired with Alexander Hamilton to free America from Spain. Interesting. I will check it out. I think it, to some degree, sounds like it covers similar territory, I guess, to the history of America outside of the country. I think it is that, or I think that's, or our story, or our country, something like that. Our America, Felipe Fernandez Amesto's history, sort of Hispanic history of the United States of America, which I sort of profiled earlier in the year on my Substack and did a couple of videos on it about how America is a Latino nation, that there's this sort of warp and weft in American history of the East-West, the standard story, if you like, of the East-West movement of the British, the 13 colonies over to, California, wiping out everything in the way, sort of thing. And then the North-South dimension, which is the, the Spanish Empire, the indigenous peoples of, America moving, and the gradual conquest of former Spanish territories like Mexico and California and Florida, in the United States. So I may well check this book out, even maybe see if I can't get Greg Grandin onto the program. Okay, what have we got next? And we have Tia Miles, Night Flyer, Harriet Tubman, and the Faith Dreams of a Free People. A little bit of a tongue twister there. Let me bring that one up for you. There we are. Harriet Tubman and the Faith Dreams of a Free People. And the story here is Harriet Tubman is among the most famous Americans ever born and soon to be the face of the $20 bill. There you go. Didn't know that. Not in Australia, obviously. Yet often she's a figure more out of myth than history, almost a comic book superhero. Despite being barely 5 feet tall, unable to read, and suffering from a brain injury, she managed to escape from her own enslavement, return again and again to lead others north to freedom without loss of life, speak out powerfully against slavery, then become the first American woman in history to lead a military raid, freeing some 700 people. You could almost say she's America's Robin Hood, a miraculous vision often rightly celebrated, but seldom understood. Interesting story. Let's go to the next one, which is Benjamin Nathan's To the Success of Our Hopeless Cause, The Many Lives of the Soviet Dissident Movement, by Benjamin Nathans. And what have we got here? So it's a discussion of the dissident movement, Samizdat, the imprisonments, the stories of Sakharov and Solzhenitsyn. An extraordinary account of this story. Interesting. I may check it out. I got to confess, there's just way too much semi-propaganda that's produced out of the American Academy, and especially out of the American journalistic scene. So I might just sort of see what I can find about that. I've got some a great guest coming up shortly, who a few weeks ago I had Sheila Fitzpatrick, of course, the very, 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 very distinguished historian of the Soviet Union and Russia, on the show. Do check that interview out if you haven't already. She also knew some of the sort of reformer communists in the late 1960s and 1970s. So yeah, I will check out Benjamin Nathan's book, but I'm just a little bit worried. It's in the Anne Applebaum sort of tradition, and unfortunately, Anne Applebaum, I think she used to be a judge on the Cundill History Prize, and I think sometimes that kind of perspective does rather bias the decisions. Now, the next book on the list is this one by Josephine Quinn, How the World Made the West, a 4,000-Year History. Do write this. Well, I've actually read this one. It's I haven't been able to say this for any of these books so far, but I have read this one, or at least the first half or so of this one, and I will make my way through it. It's really quite fascinating. It goes to the whole question that I covered in my video about, how the West is a bit of a myth. The story of the West is a myth, and the book by, I think it's Nasha McSweeney, the Myth of the West. I can't quite remember its title, but and it's sort of a story of 14 lives in the story of the West. This is more of a sort of a deeper look at the archaeological and other kind of evidence about it. It's focused more on the earlier period, but it does really make the argument that, what we think of as Western civilization, ancient Rome, ancient Greece, all this sort of stuff is very much a history of a blended set of cultures, and it's a very, very different story. So I think this is definitely one that people ought to check out. Flipping back to, how many have we got? We've got about 4 or 5 left to go. I hope everyone's doing okay there on the stream. I will get through the list. Seth Rockman, Plantation Goods, A Material History of American Slavery. Again, a Pulitzer Prize finalist in history, eye-opening rethinking of 19th century American history, reveals the interdependence of the northern industrial economy and the southern slave labor, a material history of American slavery. Excellent book, I think, especially if you're interested in that more sort of, social history, economic history dimension of things. Now, this book is one by Lyndall Roper. I haven't read this book, but I know of Lyndall Roper. She's, in fact, originally from the same university that I studied at, Melbourne University, from Melbourne, Lyndall Roper. And but I think she's been at Oxford or something like that for, quite a long time. She's quite a distinguished scholar of late medieval Reformation sort of history, pre-modern history, and this is Summer of Fire and Blood, which is the definitive history. It's I can't see it's taken me, here we go. There we go. The Summer of Fire and Blood, the German Peasants' War. This is amazing conflict that happens in the 1500s, in conflict that's related to sort of Martin Luther and the Reformation, but Martin Luther kind of disavows, I guess, the peasants who are rebelling to some degree in the name of his sort of faith. And it says here, the German Peasants' War was the greatest popular uprising in Western Europe before the French Revolution in 1524 and 1525. It swept across Germany with astonishing speed as thousands of people massed in armed bands to demand a new and more egalitarian order. The peasants took control of vast areas of southern and middle Germany, torching and plundering the monasteries, convents and castles that stood in their way, but they would prove no match for the forces of the lords, who put down the revolt by slaying somewhere between 70 and 100,000 peasants in just over 2 months. So it's the first history of this war in a generation, and it uncovers the far-reaching ramifications of this doomed rebellion. Fascinating. I think, again, I was talking with Pascal Letaz about, the Westphalian World Order, which was a response to the 30 Years' War in Germany or in Europe, particularly sort of Central Europe, between 1618 and 1648, roughly, began in a way at Prague Castle, with the defenestration of Prague, which you can, go to that window if you visit Prague Castle in Prague. And it is a fascinating story. And again, German Peasants' War, very foundational in a lot of an older generation of stories of German history, of Marxist history as well, because the social revolt of the German Peasants' War was very much interpreted in by Marxists in a certain way. And it will be quite interesting to see how Lyndall Roper, who I think has a very strong background in sort of cultural history, interprets this sort of story, and how it perhaps reframes the sequence of events, the Reformation, because the division between of the religious divisions introduced by the Reformation in Europe are, if you like, a significant part of the 30 Years' War, and their resolution is in part a significant aspect of the the Treaty of Westphalia, and it's part of the real history of the Treaty of Westphalia that tends to be forgotten, really, or misunderstood, I think, by a lot of international relations scholars who just refer to this event as, the birth of principles of national sovereignty and international world order. That looks like a really fascinating book, which I will get to at some point over the next little while. Then we have Sophia Rosenfeld, The Age of Choice, a history of freedom in modern life. Well, that's an interesting concept. Let's see what this is. Sophia Rosenfeld, I'm not sure who she is. Here we are, author. Sophia Rosenfeld is a professor of history at University of Pennsylvania, author of Democracy and Truth and Common Sense, and she's also publishes in big journals and things. And what do we say? Choice touches virtually every aspect of our lives. Sorry, wrong one. Here we are. Choice touches virtually every aspect of our lives, from what to buy and where to live, to whom to love, what profession to practice. But the option to choose in such matters was not something we always possessed or even aspired to. So how did it come that this thing became such a thing? The Age of Choice tells the long history of the invention of choice as the defining feature of modern freedom. This sounds like a really fascinating history, and she explores it in the context of romantic life, politics, ideals of human rights, the lives of women, reproductive rights, and those kind of things. And it integrates scientific findings about choice in psychology and economics. Again, this sounds like a fascinating one. And I should say, if any of these books are of particular interest to you, do let me know in the comments, and I will see what I can do about maybe even interviewing the author on the show, and also or reaching out to the authors on the show, see if they'd be interested in having a chat about their book, and also maybe even doing a little review of the book on the channel as well. Let me quickly then go to our next book. We've got two to go. The next one is Martha Sandweiss, The Girl in the Middle. Yes, you can see that. A Recovered History of the American West. A haunting image of an unnamed native child and a recovered story of the American West. Okay, so this is the story of the photograph that here appears on the cover of the book. You can see the native child and some sort of military official types or men surrounding her. She's wrapped in a blanket. And it says, in 1868, celebrated Civil War photographer Alexander Gardner travelled to Fort Laramie to document the federal government's treaty negotiations with the Lakota and other tribes of the Northern Plains. Gardner, known for his iconic portrait of Abraham Lincoln and his visceral pictures of the Confederate dead at Antietam, posed 6 federal peace commissioners. There you go, like your standard American peace candidates and peace presidents. You got your peace commissioners conducting wars with a young native girl wrapped in a blanket. The hand-labelled prints carefully name each of the men, but the girl is never identified. As the girl in the middle goes in search of her, it draws readers into the entangled lives of the photographer and his subject. Now, this is fascinating, and this is an example. I think when I did my interview with Sophie Loy Wilson about sort of China-Australia relationship, she talked about this sort of new sort of pattern, I guess, in history, or a pattern of history of sort of telling micro stories of condensed individual stories in where rather than tell the big picture and empires and class and all this sort of stuff, tell these sort of micro stories of individuals in enigmatic situations and follow the strands where they take you, because we all know from life it's complicated. We all know from history it's just as complicated, and this is a great way to sort of bring that out. So this sounds like very much a good book to read. That is Martha Sandweiss, The Girl in the Middle, A Recovered History of the American West. And then we get to our final of these 15 books, and it's by Sanjay Subramaniam, Across the Green Sea, Histories from the Western Indian Ocean. Beautiful picture there you can see on the cover of the book. I'll just focus in on that so you can see that a little bit better. And what have we got here? And Sanjay Subramaniam, I think, is a very distinguished scholar of empires and things like that. Let me see. I did think he was at the University of Oxford at some point. Sanjay Subramaniam is a distinguished professor of history and the Irving and Jean Stone Chair in Social Sciences at UCLA in California, educated in Delhi. He previously taught at a couple of in Paris and at Oxford, and he's a specialist of the early modern period, whose books include Europe's India, Words, People, Empires, 1500, 1800, and Empires Between Islam and Christianity. And William Dalrymple, who's no slouch himself, writes probably the greatest living Indian historian. So I am absolutely going to check this book out, and maybe also all of Sanjay Subramaniam's books out. Let me just read to you what it says. Beginning in the mid-15th century, the regions bordering the West Indian Ocean, the Green Sea as it was known, underwent vast transformation, and an era of commercial and cultural exchange blossomed. In Across the Green Sea, Sanjay Subramaniam recounts the history of this ocean from a variety of shifting viewpoints. He sets the scene with the withdrawal of China's Ming Dynasty. This is the famous, treasure boats of, can't remember the name now, Shanghai or something like that, and it stops at some point. The court decides it's all too expensive and there are internal struggles they need to focus on, although the reasons are much debated. Withdrawal of the China's Ming Dynasty and explores how the Western Indian Ocean was transformed by the growth and increasing prominence of the Ottoman Empire and the continued spread of Islam into East Africa. He examines how several cities, including Mecca and the vital Indian port of Surat, grew and changed during these centuries when various powers interacted until famines and other disturbances upended the region in the 17th century. Rather than proposing now, this is really interesting. Rather than proposing an artificial model of a dominant centre and its dominated peripheries, which is the thinking that still dominates. Hang on. Let me see. I'll just bring myself here back into the picture. It's the thinking that still dominates, hegemon, challenger, American primacy. It's also the thinking that dominates like a lot of radical sort of world system, Emmanuel Wallerstein and all that sort of things, sort of the critique of imperialism, the core and the periphery sort of struggle that dominates a lot of thinking about geopolitics, etc. He also says that, which is and just showing a great comment there from Violet about the sort of micro story approach. He also it's a very different way of thinking about it. So rather than proposing an artificial model of a dominant centre, let me fix this up, and its dominated peripheries across the Green Sea, reveals the complexity of a truly dynamic and polycentric system through the use of connected histories, a method which Subramaniam himself has pioneered. I feel I might have read one of his books. I just can't remember. And certainly aware of his work. This is quite exciting. I will absolutely be checking this out, and I may well, as I say, either review it here on the program or see if I can't even get this very distinguished historian to have a chat with me. You never really know how people react when you send them emails out of the blue, but sometimes they do accept. And I've got to tell you, I've got a couple of great guests coming up on the show. As I mentioned, I did an interview with Salvatore Barbones earlier this week, and he'll be talking about his book Dhamma Democracy. But I've also got talking to a couple of other great guests, who, including Michael Pembroke, who appeared on Pascal Lataz's show not so long ago, and a great scholar of the sort of entry into diplomacy and entry into war of the Soviet Union in World War II, which will help, I guess, reframe this story, which has become very, very complex and controversial in recent times. But I really hope that this little guide to, this little guide, hang on, I've stuffed things up here. There we go. This little guide to the 15 books on the Cundill History Prize Longlist, which, just let me recap them all for you. I think I'm not. Will I be able to? Yeah, they're sort of in a slightly different order there, I can see. But we've got A Fractured Liberation, which is the story about Korea. So I'll go from top left across. The book by Sanjay Subramaniam, Across the Green Sea, which sounds a ripper. We've got the book about... Let me actually just bring this here. Just trying to do a few too many things at once here, so I hope you forgive me that. Against Constitutional Originalism, by Jonathan Ginnap. America by Greg Grandin. Black Convicts by Santilla Chingapi. Disrupted City, Manan Ahmed Asif's Disrupted City, Walking the Pathways of Memory and History in Lahore. How the World Made the West by Jonathan Quinn. I think that is the Lyndall Roper on the German Summer of Fire and Blood. Oh no, that's not it. That is, what is that book there? The print is too small for me to read properly. Sorry about this. It is To the Success of Our Hopeless Cause, The Many Lives of the Soviet Dissident Movement by Benjamin Nathans. Then we have Night Flyer by Tia Miles, which is about Harriet Tubman. We have Plantation Goods by Seth Rockman, which is a material history of American slavery. We have Lyndall Roper's Summer of Fire and Blood about the German Peasants' War. Highly, highly, highly distinguished historian. The fascinating, curious sort of cultural, intellectual history, The Age of Choice, A History of Freedom and Modern Life by Sophia Rosenfeld. The story that I've just discovered about the first and last king of Haiti, The Rise and Fall of Henry Christophe by Marlene L. Doubt, D-A-U-T, I hope I've said that name correctly. The Girl in the Middle, the fascinating sounding micro story, if you like, by where is the Martha Sandweiss. And finally, Wages of Housework by where are you? Wages of Housework by Emily Kalachi. So all, no doubt, brilliant books. They've been commended by the panel on the Cundill History Longlist, and definitely worth checking out. You can go to the Cundill History website, which is, what is it? I just don't have the Cundill History website with me at the moment. So if you just Google Cundill History Prize, Cundill, they have a list of all the books and all those links that I went through there on the website. I know a couple of years ago when I interviewed Marie Favreau, whose fabulous book about the Mongols and the Golden Horde, the Mongol Empire, and its successor states, the Golden Horde. On the show, she was actually one of the judges on the Cundill History Prize that year. She, of course, revealed no secrets to me, and so yeah, it's definitely one of the high prestige history prize. But more than anything, it just helps identify these books that, you won't often see publicized in mainstream media or on YouTube channels. A lot of the, kind of history books that get automatically generated by algorithms, Gibbon's Rise and Fall, or, Spengler or whatever, history books that are really outdated and don't really reflect the sort of current practice of people. So it's really worth going to somewhere like the Cundill History Prize just to see what's coming out, see the new, fresh sort of ideas, to see some of the sort of work of, like, Lyndall Roper is I mean, I guess she's about my age or a little bit older than me. So she's sort of, it's a very distinguished and long practicing historian who's written what looks like it will be, the authoritative history of the German Peasants' War for decades to come. So it really does give you ideas about things that you can explore, which you won't really get just by, following the same old tracks. So I really do think it's a fabulous thing to do. So before I wrap up, let me just share some of the comments that people have been making. What have we got? We've got Violet Quinlaw, who's made some fantastic comments throughout the show, saying, I think there might be more to that story, probably some interesting history there. I've lost track of which one that was, Violet, but thank you for saying that. That seems like a detail someone worried he was a werewolf would have employed. That's I'm not, again, I've probably lost track of some of these sort of things. I do see there are some great comments that people have made. Al Qaeda talks about the French still occupy most, or at least certainly, the king that shot himself in the heart. Okay, yep, got it. Yep, thanks, Violet. Al Qaeda saying the French still occupy most of Oceania, a massive claim on the ocean and the islands. I'm not sure if it's most, but it's certainly a large claim. And of course, New Caledonia, or Kanaki, is still a French colony all these years after supposedly we decolonized the world. And I'm going to be doing a video on, even potentially a live stream on decolonization in the not too distant future. So we'll return to that topic. Tan Mong says US never experienced unless they were hit by the same. Yep. And I'll just see if there's anything significant that happened. Yeah. Thanks so much for participating in the stream, everyone, and making it, a good, lively conversation. I hope the recommendations there on the various history books have been helpful, and I hope also, sometimes painful recollection of what exactly happened at Hiroshima 80 years ago helped just bring that back to your mind and to your heart, and perhaps also help you think about the situation we all are facing today in the shadow of a second nuclear war. I really hope it doesn't come to that. I hope I don't have to talk about that sort of issue next week. I think I would really love to sort of shift focus a bit to some of the issues to do with India. And I've got, as I said, a great interview coming up with Salvatore Barbones, and also perhaps a surprise guest, which I think will be of interest to everyone as well in the next couple of days. So I think I will thank you all for viewing and watching. I'll break up this live stream into a couple of segments and release it over the next couple of days. Do head over to jeffrich.substack.com, become a paid subscriber if you'd like to support my work. It's probably the best way to do it. You can always also thank me here right on YouTube. But by becoming a paid subscriber, you get all my sort of weekly emails, my guides, my deep dives into issues, and you can participate in all the detail of my slow reads as well. And also do check out my sort of slightly newly designed website my homepage at YouTube. Let me know if it's sort of working a little bit better for everyone. And also leave me a comment if there's any of those books that we talked about today that are of particular interest to you. Let's all remember Hiroshima. Let's all prevent a second nuclear war. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. Bye now.